I'm Sophia Wu. I'm the daughter of a Chinese immigrant dad and a white American mom. Growing up biracial, I have always stood on the cross-cultural cornerstones that bridge the gaps between my two worlds, East versus West, privilege versus sacrifice. I belong to a new generation, hallmarked by confidence and adaptability, possessing a deft ease with navigating the pressures of an existence, never marred by the hardships of building a life from scratch. I am a member of second-generation Americans, a group filled with the raw hopes of our parents' generation to achieve something greater. I have always felt that the American dream was within my reach, but I also never fully grasped what that really meant. I grew up in a comfortable, middle-class household in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., spending my childhood days coming home to a beautiful, stately structure with sky-high ceilings and bright green houseplants lining the marble floors. I was fortunate enough to be supported by my dad, both emotionally and financially, throughout college and graduate school. I overcame any obstacle without fear or instability, and often took this for granted. So when my dad called me to tell me that he was cutting me off financially, I reacted selfishly and immaturely without any thought. I'm not moving back home. I hate that place. It's in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing there for me. I complained. My dad sighed, his exasperation with me stretching thin. "You kids have it so easy, you don't even understand," he said. When I was 24 years old, I booked my flight to the US with only $40 in my pocket. He went on to tell me how, a mere hour after arriving at JFK Airport, he was immediately cheated by a taxi driver, losing nearly all of his money for an overpriced ride to the Chinese consulate. The consulate was providing temporary $5 per night rooms for newly arrived Chinese students, like my dad, who was left with his pockets empty and his spirits stripped in a foreign country. When I moved to Maryland, I found a kitchen staff job at a Chinese restaurant to help pay for my school tuition, he said. I worked long hours, cutting the vegetables and preparing the broth. I felt so suffocated from the hot steam of boiling soup on one side and the smokiness from stir fry on the other. Sometimes I'd have to step outside during breaks just to breathe. I could hear the pain in my dad's voice as my lack of awareness forced him to rehash his early, difficult immigrant experiences. At 24 years old myself, I had never struggled to survive, let alone starting over in a land so far away and different from my home country. I met your mom in 1991, he continued. We married in 1992 and had you the following year. We moved into the basement, you remember, right? At Mr. Lau's house. We thought we were so lucky. A 2-bedroom basement apartment with a backyard too. At that point, I had already earned my MBA and found a managerial position at Citibank. Your mom and I saved money year after year. Right before we had your brother in 1999, I decided to buy the land and build the big house. I then flashed back to my world at 5 years old when I used to visit the construction site and play with the dusty blocks of sandalwood as my dad perspired profusely while drilling or heavy lifting. My future home was still in its skeletal stages, with measuring tapes, pencils, and copies of the blueprint lying around. I remember rarely seeing my dad that year. I went there every day after work. I was so tired, but It was my dream to build this house for you kids, my dad continued. He paused. The house you now say you hate so much, he added softly. With that, my heart broke for him. Instantly wrought with shame and guilt, I apologized to him. I'm sorry, Dad. Just so sorry. I hadn't heard this story before, and it certainly shed light on a perspective I had never acknowledged. For me, it's relatively easy to overlook the hard work and perseverance it took for my dad to provide me a life of unlimited opportunity and accessibility, and it is one that I feel like I will never truly deserve. Today's second-generation Asian American experience is very much shaped by the burden our immigrant parents bore for us, driven by the unifying quest to fulfill their own American dream, while establishing a foundation to help their children chase it too. I may not have endured long hours working in a kitchen or lived paycheck to paycheck, fogged with dreaded uncertainty, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a part of my roots. Bridging the gaps between my two worlds also means bridging the gaps between the Asian American immigrant and the Asian American natural-born citizen. It's about understanding that I am responsible for paving a new pathway for my generation as well, upholding what we've been taught as we continue to carve out our identities, my identity, in an ever-evolving multicultural society. My dad's sleepless nights in that hot room shared with 10 other students at the Chinese consulate, the 4-hour bumpy bus ride he took from New York to Washington, those 1 a.m. shifts spent cleaning the kitchen while deliriously laughing with his fellow Asian immigrant coworkers, the traditional American wedding, followed by the traditional Chinese wedding, and the long Saturday afternoons he spent driving his American kids home from Chinese language school, are an indelible part of my soul and always will be, as mine was always a part of his. This is how we press on through recognition and gratitude, moving forward together while never forgetting where we came from. Thank you.